Hello everyone. In this video lecture, I'm going to be discussing the film adaptation of The Tempest that we watched last week on Tuesday, The Forbidden Planet. Unfortunately, due to some technological difficulties on my end, we were unable to actually discuss the film, so I'm going to go into a brief description of some of the parallels between The Forbidden Planet and Shakespeare's final play, The Tempest, and reflect on this work as a work of adaptation that uses an original work as inspiration. The first section of this lecture is essentially going to break down the various different parallel elements between the characters in these two works, and also the plots. Then, I'll reflect on the ways in which the directors and writers of this film reimagined and appropriated some of Shakespeare's central themes. If you'll recall, adaptation as inspiration, or inspiration as a form of adaptation, occurs when a work is not a direct adaptation. It doesn't take characters or situations from the original film or original novel or play and then presents them on screen, attempting to accurately reflect the original source. It doesn't even take the original work and then modernize it or adapt it into a new context, like the Nicolas Cage film adaptation of The Color of Space. Instead, it uses some of the core ideas or plot points as a form of inspiration. It uses them as the building blocks for a new plot line. It reimagines situations, renames characters, or takes basic outlines and concepts from the original. In this case, we have, in the most general terms, a story about a master of language, a man who has phenomenal control over his new world, this forbidden planet. He has raised his daughter in isolation. He is able to control everything that he sees around him through a kind of almost magical power to shape the world as he imagines it. This planet is visited by a ship filled with men whom his daughter has never seen. And she falls in love with perhaps the best one of them, the first man that she has ever met. The great danger, however, on this little island in the midst of the seas of the cosmos is the hidden and unconfessed darkness inside this tremendous godlike figure. There are a number of parallels, then, that you can see in the general outline of some of the plots loosely associated with The Tempest. We have here Dr. Morbius, a man of books and language, a philologist, a man who studies the history and the nature of language. And he uses that knowledge in order to delve into the Krell data tapes in the Forbidden Planet. So he gains his power over technology, his ability to create the robot, Robbie, through his knowledge of language, because he is able to translate the language of the Krell. Altera is a girl who has been raised in isolation. As the cook says when the starship is landing on this new world, on the Forbidden Planet, it's one of them new worlds. Literally, the new world allegory or association with the Tempest is in the forefront. Robbie, this benevolent magical being, is the product of Krell science that Morbius has appropriated and adapted for himself. In a sense, it's like Robbie is Ariel, this kind creature that can do no harm to other people. As we saw, if he attempts to effect violence on another human being, he starts to break down and is incapable of functioning, much like Ariel. And, like Ariel, he was almost left behind by the previous inhabitants of the island who used magic. Right? The Krell's science was so advanced that at the end they were able to create anything that they could imagine with merely a thought. These magicians left behind the technology, just like Sycorax, Caliban's mother, the witch, left behind Ariel pegged up in the knotty entrails of an oak, that Morbius was able to appropriate and use to construct Robbie. So there are a series of different narrative parallels loosely between these various different characters and the original work. Morbius, likewise, has his own version of the wedding mask as he shows Commander Adams through the Krell laboratories and the machines in this extensive series of scenes where he's demonstrating his power to them. He takes pleasure in presenting the spectacle of his power and of this civilization that's been lost to them. His connection to Prospero is even made explicit when he uses the terms such as magic to describe his art. And Dr. Austrow says that it's like Aladdin's lamp in a physics laboratory as he looks down on the scene of Altera being projected by Dr. Morbius's mind. Morbius is likewise threatened by a series of usurpations, just as Prospero is threatened by Caliban and Stefano and Trinculo. Dr. Austrow goes after Prospero's books, the data tapes that give Morbius his brain boost. As Caliban says, if you take away his books, he is not but a sot, as I am. Dr. Ostrauss seeks to take Morbius's books from him in order to usurp his power, usurp his control. We also have this extensive commentary on the impossibility of ever achieving a kind of utopia. Remember that in the original play, Gonzalo dreams of a utopia on this island where all people can survive without sweat or endeavor. There'll be no leaders, no rulers, no people who have to work for their living. The Krell's dream of a world that is free from instrumentality, that is free from any instruments that they have to engage with or interact with, is a parallel to Gonzalo's vision. As he says, no use of metal, corn, or wine, or oil, no occupation, all things in common nature should produce without sweat or endeavor. The Krell look at the world in the same way. They're machinery that allows them to project thought and to render into reality anything that they can imagine is exactly that. All things are produced without sweat or endeavor. They don't have to labor. They don't have to work. All they have to do is think, and food or riches drop down upon them. Gonzalo, as we discussed in the play, is cast down. His vision of utopia and the possibility of any kind of utopian vision being rendered real is presented to us as being ridiculous. Gonzalo, even as he dreams of this idealized world where all men live together in peace and harmony and never have to labor again, he is completely blind to Sebastian and Antonio, these two men who are plotting right next to him to murder him. In the same way, the Krell were blind to the evils that roil inside of them, the monstrous savage that is, of the id that is inside every single human being and every single Krell. That evolutionary ancestor of ours, the monstrous savage or the animal that threatens at any moment to break out. The one that Prospero grapples with when he fails to recognize and then in the end acknowledges the Caliban that is his own. The Caliban that lives inside of him. It is that monstrous evil that is a part of all of us and that we have to acknowledge and struggle against daily, that we have to kill and overcome daily, that threatens to destroy Gonzalo, utopia, any civilization, and that does, in fact, destroy the Krell. The Krell's perfect world is doomed from the start because they forgot that man has evil within him. It's endemic to our nature. And Gonzalo, for all his high-minded philosophizing on the perfect society, for all his gentleness in response to Alonso's suffering, is blind to evil. His kingdom is impossible because he thinks that people can live happily, be fulfilled. He thinks that human beings are perfectible. Just as Sebastian Antonio's mockery renders ridiculous Gonzalo's notions of an ideal kingdom, as they point out the logical inconsistencies in his ideas and the incoherence of his civilization, their plot demonstrates the utter impossibility of his paradise on earth. Other more subtle parallels between these two works lie in Altera and her function within the story. Much like Miranda in Act 1 of The Tempest, Altera is moved to an act of mercy. She's terrified by the spectacle that she sees of the ship and crew in distress in her dreams. She sees them under attack by this monstrous creature of the id, as we learn it to be. And she races to her father, begging him to save them or spare them or help them. Subconsciously, perhaps, she recognizes his ability to do so. Through her character, the director also registers the threat of sexual spoiling or impropriety in the scene in which she kisses the captain and then is assaulted by the tiger that was once so tame. The tiger attacks her after she has fallen in love with Commander Adams. So there's this physical and symbolic representation of the bestial lust and animality associated with physical desire and love that has now become threatening and dangerous. She no longer has control over it. She no longer has it tamed. The tiger attacks her, registering the same kinds of threats that we saw in that Tempest illustration and in the interactions between Ferdinand and Miranda that Prospero is always warning them about. Likewise, it's in Caliban, that threat of sexual predation that we saw in him and that Ferdinand could affect as well. There's a loss of metaphysical virginity of the mind that causes her to fall under the threat of animality. It's something dangerous and uncontrolled. And so while the tiger may be beautiful, what it represents on the moral scheme of the film is no less dangerous than a Caliban or Ferdinand's potential experience and his ability to manipulate Miranda and to use her if she allows him and gives in to her desires. Because, of course, he is far more experienced than her. He is more worldly wise. And as he said, I have known many women, but none of them are like you. So we have this undercurrent of sexual threat that's registered in Altera's character and the play. Then, of course, we have the monster of the id, Morbius's hidden darkness, the Caliban of this film. It is, as the captain notes, his secret lust for vengeance and violence that threatens to destroy him and everything that he loves. The difference between Prospero and Morbius is that at the end of the film, Morbius does not accept his darkness. Instead, he rejects it. Prospero looks at Caliban and takes ownership both of the creature, of the Caliban inside of himself, and of the part that he has had to play in the development and perhaps the malformation of Caliban. Morbius at the end screams out at the monster of the id, "I am not a monster, I deny you." Now, we can take this as a positive renunciation of his animality, as when Prospero determines that the rarer action is in virtue, not in vengeance, and he decides at the end, finally, he resolves on the side of mercy and grace and clemency to his adversaries, rather than that roiling darkness and the desire for revenge that he had. It could be that at this moment, Morbius, like Prospero, overcomes his animal nature and does the good and proper thing. However, I reject this interpretation because it makes more sense to me that his situation and his success and his folly alike parallel those of the Krell. The Krell too were destroyed when they tried to deny their animal nature. In evolving beyond it, they forgot its existence. So it lay dormant, waiting for the moment that it could resurface and destroy them, undo all the many millennia of reason and humanity with which the Krell had been blessed. Morbius, much like the Krell, forgets even to the end that he has a darker nature. He cannot face it. And thus, he dies. He does not find the kind of success. He does not get to go home and leave his island of isolation, like Prospero. Instead, he perishes in grappling with that darkness that he never fully acknowledges as his own, in trying to give it up. Not giving it up positively by denying it and choosing the virtue, by acknowledging that that darkness is inside of himself and fighting with it, but in attempting to deny it to the last. I am not a monster, I deny you. So there's this kind of complex reformation of Prospero's conclusion that doesn't allow Morbius to achieve the kind of reconciliation with his own darkness and with his own Caliban. I think that the film posits the negative end of a man and of a humanity that forgets the inviolable laws of its own nature. And that is the concluding comment that the captain reflects on. He says that Dr. Morbius's name will shine on through the millennia when humanity has crawled its way up to the same level as the Krell. We will forever remember Morbius as a warning to never forget the darkness that hides within all of us and that threatens at any moment, if we fail to acknowledge it and fail to fight it and suppress it, to destroy everything that we've tried to build. We must acknowledge that a Caliban lives within all of us, and we must ever be on guard against it. In this film, then, Shakespeare's characters, his themes, his ideas are taken and transformed, used for different purposes, as a warning rather than a celebration as they are in Shakespeare's final play. Remember that Shakespeare's final play is a celebration of our ability to take up the narrative that he has left us, to take everything that he has given us. The power that Prospero has, the magic of Shakespeare, is invested in his audience. And it's exactly that power that the directors and writers of this film have taken up to reimagine the narrative of Prospero and to put it into a new context, use it for a different purpose. We end this course on adaptation with this work because it is the perfect instantiation, the perfect reflection of the nature of adaptation. Reimagining the great stories of our past, reflecting on them and what they mean for us, reapplying them and acknowledging the ways in which they still speak to our continued human condition. This film demonstrates the nature of adaptation, its function, and also Shakespeare's power and worth. When we're dealing with a work, whether it's in adaptation or it's the original, a great work of literature like Shakespeare's plays, we look at them not just because there's some kind of monolithic ideal, and we look to Shakespeare not just because he's the greatest author in the English canon as determined by the powers that be and overly enthusiastic English teachers. That's not the reason why any story endures. That's not the reason why Shakespeare endures. And it's not the reason these stories continue to be relevant and that we take them up again and again, reimagine them, refigure them, and adapt them for new audiences and to suit new purposes. The Krell's machinery, which survived 100 millennia, gives shape to the most wondrous dreams, the ephemeral thoughts of a moment, the hidden desires of a heart, and the enduring and possibly unconquerable darkness that lies inside human beings. Shakespeare's plays, through imitation, adaptation, and inspiration, work in much the same way. Our ability to reimagine and shape them, just as Prospero wished us to do, allows us to confront continually both the transient, even if crucial, personal and collective concerns of the moment. Here, in this story, because all the Krell's power lies on these nuclear reactors, the weapons that the characters use are nuclear blasters, and the main batteries of the ship that they use to confront the monster of the id are nuclear powered. It is the threat of potential nuclear war that this film reimagines Prospero's story to confront. But also, not just those transient issues of the moment, also the enduring questions of humanity, like what it means to be human and how we should best live our lives, and that constant struggle against the darkness of our own animal impulses. Thus, it is because Shakespeare is constantly being made alive, being renewed, that he's so effective. And that's the power of adaptation. In large part, it's because characters and stories and ideas are constantly changing with every interpretation, adaptation, and reading. Continually being considered in new ways, offering new inspiration and new insights into our condition as human beings. It's precisely because that every time we pick up a story, one of Shakespeare's plays, we also take up Prospero's invitations in the Epilogue of the Tempest. We become the masters of Shakespeare's stories, and through that acknowledged investment in communal power, of interpretation, of change in response to his art, that Shakespeare achieves a kind of immortality through communal recognition. In the end, adaptation is taking all of these different stories and reconfiguring, reimagining them, giving them life again, so that we can better understand who we are and how we live our lives. I hope that you've gotten something from this course, that you look at the stories that we tell ourselves and that we reimagine in order to best suit our purposes with new eyes. May you be blessed as you go forward in your education and with your lives. And it has truly and sincerely been a great pleasure working with you over the course of this semester. Thank you for your time, and good luck on all your final assessments and with whatever else you might do going forward.